Okay, good morning, everyone. I am Justine Dioknasikat. I am a member of the board of the Asian Development Bank's Board of Directors. I'm from the Philippines, but I represent 6 other countries: Kazakhstan, Marshall Islands, Maldives, Mongolia, Pakistan, and Timor-Leste. I am also the chair of the ADB Development Effectiveness Committee. It's a pleasure to welcome you today at this seminar on enhancing ADB's strategy and results to drive development effectiveness. The global landscape has changed dramatically in the recent years, presenting us with increasing climate risks, growing debt vulnerabilities, persistent inequality, and rapid technological shifts. These challenges demand more than business as usual. They call for a transformation. That's why we're here today. This seminar is about ensuring that our strategies, tools, and partnerships remain fit for purpose in a rapidly changing world. Development finance institutions like ADB and our partners represented here today are needed more than ever. But to truly meet these challenges, we must evolve, rethink how we operate, how we measure success, and how we collaborate with our clients and stakeholders. Today's seminar provides an opportunity to reflect on our progress, ensure we are focusing on the right priorities, and guarantee that our efforts are making a lasting impact. We will hear how ADB and other development partners are addressing today's fast-moving landscape. We'll all explore ADB's Strategy 2030 midterm review and ADB's new corporate results framework and its stronger focus on outcomes to enhance accountability, focus, and impact. We're fortunate to have an outstanding group of speakers with us today. Lu Shen, in the middle, well, third from the right, is the director of ADB's Results Management and Aid Effectiveness Division. She will open with a presentation that highlights the findings and key shifts from the Strategy 2030 midterm review and the new corporate results framework. Following Lu Shen's presentation, we will move into our panel discussion featuring our Vice President, Scott Morris. He's in the middle. He's Vice President for East Asia, Southeast Asia, and the Pacific, who joined ADB in November 2023 and has over 25 years of experience in international economic policymaking and research. Lisandro Martin, here to my left, is Director of the Department of Outcomes at the World Bank Group, who has over 2 decades of experience in the World Bank Group and has also served in several leadership positions at the International Fund for Agricultural Development. Lena Klossner, second from the right, Deputy Managing Director and Head of Strategy at the Nordic Development Fund, who has over 2 decades of experience in the NDF, and also, I just learned, a couple of years' experience at ADB previously, who has worked with private sector consulting services related to development globally. And last but not the least, Bobby Hernawan, he's the rightmost there, head of the Center for Climate Change Finance and Multilateral Policy at Indonesia's Ministry of Finance, who began his public career in 1995. After we hear from the panel, we will have a Q&A segment where we will invite you to join the conversation and pose your questions to our panelists or share your reflections. With that, I'd like to invite Lu Shen to begin her presentation. Thank you very much.
I'm just going to do this sitting down, but thank you. We have an amazing panel, and so the presentation part is actually just setting the scene a little bit for all of you, but I will try to keep it brief because I think this is probably the least interesting part of this seminar. So let's go to the next slide. So, yeah, Strategy 2030 was actually first published in 2018, and this really articulated ADB's vision and approach for the 10-year or for the long-term strategy, where we really focused on this vision of delivering a prosperous, inclusive, resilient, and sustainable Asia and the Pacific. I think this has remained true even now with a lot of the concepts of how we're more than just a bank, but we're also an institution that values knowledge, that values partnerships, and looks at different tools and principles where we look at country systems and looking at innovative technologies and provide integrated solutions. Next slide. But since then, especially over the past few years, I think we see that our region faces a number of interconnected vulnerabilities that threaten sustainable development. Events such as COVID-19, as well as the global cost of living crisis, have really rolled back years of development in the region, while geopolitical risks and conflicts continue to threaten the region as well as create disruptions. And last but certainly not the least, climate change compounds all of these challenges for us and endangering lives and livelihoods, more importantly, across the globe, but especially in the region. But amidst this backdrop, shareholders are calling for MDBs to do a lot more and do them better and do them faster. So in particular, they challenge us to be more transformative in terms of our approach to development work, to more concretely develop support that transcends national borders, amongst other things. Next slide. So within the 3 dimensions of the MDB evolution, namely the mission and the vision, operational approaches, as well as financial model and capacity, ADB has been spearheading a lot of initiatives under this agenda. So from the early balance sheet optimization through our capital adequacy framework, our ADF replenishments, where we, when we highlight the solutions and approaches for our most vulnerable nations, to changing the way that we work through the new operating model that has been implemented over the past 2 years, but more specifically on the re-examination of Strategy 2030 and the accompanying corporate results framework. So these are kind of the things that we are looking at the way that we set our targets, what our priorities are, and setting very concrete goals and targets for our ambition. Next slide. So now turning to some of the more specific areas of the new strategy 2030. Through the midterm review process, we wanted to establish a greater focus. As maybe some of you didn't know, we used to have 7 operational priorities, but in the midterm review, we really re-examine this and say, okay, well, what are some of the other focuses that we should really hone in on? So aligning with the new operating model, the climate finance angle and the private sector development angle are some of the most important areas that we're focusing on. But in connection with a broader discussion within G20 as well as with other MDBs, regional cooperation and integration is something that we are really focusing on, but with a very specific focus on global and regional public goods. And in the era of AI and other transformational technological developments, we also recognize the importance of digital transformation as part of our forward-looking focus, where we believe this will form a critical path for a lot of our clients in the region, with a focus on digital infrastructure and its enabling environment. And finally, resilience and empowerment. While this is a fairly broad area, it's a reflection of one of the most profound shifts that we're facing in the region, namely the rise of additional risks and uncertainty, which will require us to double down on our emphasis for agility, but also as a continued focus on poverty and inequality. Next slide. So the new corporate results framework is very much aligned with the midterm review for Strategy 2030. And this is the way that we're reframing some of the ways that we're thinking about development impact, putting development results at the center of the whole framework, and thinking about the three interconnected performance areas that we need to monitor in order to achieve some of the outcomes that we aspire to. And the other thing that I would highlight is that the previous corporate results framework used to have 60 results indicators plus 155 tracking indicators. And so one of the main objectives on this one is really to help ourselves clarify that focus, right? And so from that, we have gotten down to 35 results indicators plus 37 tracking indicators, which we think will make the cascading of our corporate strategy and corporate goals much more easy when it goes down to operations. So the three parts are strategic alignment in terms of performance areas, and this is where we look at what our priorities are, including climate and including RCI and including digital transformation as they have been identified in the Strategy 2030 midterm review. But we're also looking at operational management, so the things about the quality of projects that are being prepared and quality of the projects that are being implemented, which forms a very, very big part about the success of the projects that we're developing. And last but certainly not the least, the organizational effectiveness. Do we have the right people? Do we have the right systems in place to help us achieve those goals at the center? Next slide. So just to give you a flavor, I won't go through all of them, but in terms of the development results, we're really focusing on the outcome orientation. And I'm sure that Lisandro will also be talking about this from the World Bank side. We felt the importance of really linking this to the SDGs under People, Planet, and Prosperity to give that alignment to the overall global agenda. And it features 12 outcome-oriented indicators aligned with these three separate headings under the SDGs, including the number of people lifted out of poverty and vulnerable situations, those that has improved standards of living, and those with enhanced climate and disaster resilience. Under prosperity, one of the things that we're really honing in on the focus is on job creation and economic growth, as well as financial stability. And so these are kind of the conversations that keep us really interested, not just as ADB, but also as MDBs as a system. Next slide. So the strategic alignment, and this is, as I mentioned, really are aligned with the 5 areas of focus that were spelled out under the midterm review strategy 2030 to ensure that our operations align with the corporate priorities, particularly with the emphasis on climate action, on private sector development in terms of mobilization, in terms of regional public goods and how we measure our contributions to those, as well as on digital transformation, resilience, and empowerment. So within this performance area, 7 of the 10 indicators are corporate indicators that were included in Strategy 2030 midterm review, and this will help us track our progress and ensure that the initiatives are effectively contributing to these critical areas. Next slide. And this, I think, will be the last. Yeah, so just to give you a sense of the cascading that we were talking about, so from the SDGs to our Strategy 2030 to the corporate results framework, which will then filter down through our work planning and budget framework, and this is really looking at our pipeline, but also at the country level, thinking through about alignment with national strategies through our country partnership strategies and results framework that's there, and then down to the operational level and project level where you have the project level logical frameworks, or what we call the design and monitoring frameworks. But also, as an institution, we also have established annual KPIs for our work plans to keep us engaged with what is our long-term goal that we're trying to achieve by 2030. So thank you very much for listening, and I'll pass the floor back to Justine.
Yeah, thank you so much, Lucien. I consider myself to be very lucky to have been on the board while they were reviewing and reforming this corporate results framework. As a policy, so before I joined the board, I was a professor of economics, and I was also a policy researcher. And always the challenge is, how sure are you that your solutions are getting the development outcomes that you want? It's not just the outputs, but really outcomes, which is why I appreciated what was done, the enormous work that you did to minimize and reduce the number of indicators and such. But in any case, so just housekeeping, there will be 3 rounds of questions for this panel. We'll have about 50 minutes, okay? The rounds will focus about, are we focusing on the right strategies? How are we operationalizing it? And third, how can MDBs work better together? So those are the 3 questions. And after that, the 3 rounds. And after that, we will be opening up to Q&A. So you can think about your questions also around those 3 general ideas. Thank you so much. So I'll turn to Scott first to talk about, well, you know this, right? Our region is facing many interlinked development challenges, such as climate, inequality, and demographic shifts. How is ADB adopting its strategies and operations to best support developing member countries in addressing these challenges? Could you highlight specific areas where ADB is demonstrating leadership and identify any areas where additional effort or innovation is required? Thank you, Scott.
Thank you, Justine. Good morning, everyone. Let me say, but even before your own introduction, Justine, I just wanted to say we are very fortunate to have a bona fide expert on these issues on our board. It makes a huge difference to have that kind of leadership coming from the board on this agenda. Same goes for management with Lou. I think we really have very strong leadership in pursuing the development effectiveness agenda within the bank. For our online audience, I simply want to point out we have a great audience in the room, but they chose to leave a big hole in the middle. So it appears like something different, but there's really great turnout. I'm pleased to see the interest in this topic. So let me start. Maybe this is by way of a bit of a confession that I haven't lost many hours of sleep over the content of vision statements in the past and generally how we brand ourselves. That said, I really like our new vision statement, and particularly the leading phrase of solving complex challenges together. I think it's particularly relevant to this agenda because it's attaching itself less to one theme, one sector, more to a way of doing things. Obviously, the together part speaks a lot about our multilateral character and the fundamental nature of our partnership with our developing member countries. But even the solving, it does speak to targeting outcomes. It's not about financing certain things or engaging. It really is highly aspirational in pointing to our desire to get to real outcomes. And then finally, this complexity issue is key right now. And if I think of the longer history of our institution, other multilateral development banks, there was an earlier era where our agenda, frankly, was simpler in terms of responding what the needs were. So namely, scarcity of capital in most of the developing world. And we were really created with a financial model that was aimed at meeting that need without much attached to it beyond that. And then even as we developed, so much of what we did at ADB was sort of more straightforward investments in physical infrastructure at a time when those were more simply defined than they are today. Fast forward to where we are today, the complexity comes in across everything that we do. Even in those traditional areas of physical infrastructure, when we think about resilience agenda and what needs to go into what we would even think of as a standard road project, how we're bringing information technology into all these things, and then how we have defined sort of cross-cutting themes in areas like gender that become pretty essential, again, even to those what we would think of as a simple road project. So all of that is added to a much higher level of complexity even in the objectives we defined, which makes the task of monitoring, of tracking, in its own way, much more complex, and leads to the problems I think that Lou identified. And suddenly you have far too many performance indicators, and you have to think about how do we step back and view this more strategically. So just that as a starting point. Second point I would make that I think adds to, frankly, the burden of ensuring the focus on development effectiveness and outcomes is that we've done some important work over the last few years that, again, goes back to the financial model. So namely, when it comes to ADB and the capital it has to deploy our loan resources across most of our countries, we made some important reforms that really unlocked a lot of additional new headroom in the institution, as we've defined it, $100 billion in additional lending capacity in the years ahead. And I would identify that alongside what was a very successful replenishment of our Asian Development Fund last year with a resource envelope of $5 billion in grants that will play a hugely important role in the countries that are eligible for that. And just as an indicator there, for the Pacific Island countries that defined most of the ADF constituency, this marks more than a third of an increase in resource allocation to those countries. So that is certainly good news, but it also sets a challenge, is that as we are tasking ourselves with financing more, it creates additional stresses on doing it well. And particularly when we go out there with a big announcement of, $100 billion is a big number. Well, how do we plan for effective allocation of those resources? What does the scale up look like? Are we staffed appropriately to do this, again, with the end goal being the first goal, which is effective impact? So it's, I think it's worth highlighting that, because in some ways, I think we want to declare success with announcement of the financing envelope, and that's just the beginning of what is a very long road toward ultimate outcomes in these projects. Just a few brief points on some key areas that we're working on that builds on, I think, Lou's presentation, but highlighting where maybe I spend a bit more of my time thinking about it and focusing. But this regional cooperation has been a long-standing priority for the institution. I think it's received renewed ambition under our strategy review. It's actually in our charter. I mean, in terms of as a defined commitment, but it poses its own set of challenges in targeting outcomes, in identifying the right kinds of initiatives. But it's also an area where we do have emerging some very key initiatives that go beyond just the sort of the long-standing structural support we provide to sub-regional bodies. Within my portfolio, ASEAN is a key actor, and what I'm seeing is sort of a growing number of initiatives, and really initiatives, something like the so-called ASEAN Power Grid, an effort to take a regional approach to building out the transmission infrastructure around to meet energy needs in the region. Hugely ambitious, measured in scale of financing, but also, again, the complexity of what it takes to achieve it, both technical complexity, but also political economy issues. So, again, setting ourselves up for very significant challenges. How do we both carry that forward, but do it in a way and that we are continuously monitoring for impact and effectiveness? Am I going too long? You're looking, yes. Okay. So Yeah, let me just stop on that as one example, and we can come back to others. So I'll stop there. Thanks.
Okay, thank you so much, Scott. So the takeaway is really, no, I appreciate how you highlighted the importance of regional cooperation and how we are doing good there, but we can do better. It's one of our strategic focus areas from the midterm review, but it's also something that we have been working on pretty well, I believe, at ADB. Now, let me turn to you, Lisandro. So with the World Bank Group, of course, with all of these demographic changes, how are you adjusting your strategies? And do you have any examples of good efforts in adjustment and strategies, as well as areas where you could still improve? So thank you.
Thank you very much, Justin, and good morning, everyone. And thank you so much for the invitation. And congratulations, Lou, to you and your teams for wonderful work on the new results framework and strategy. And the question is great. I think we all understand very well, like you say, that we live at a turning point. There are many, many challenges that we need to solve together, and these challenges are very complex, as you captured that in the phrase. For the World Bank Group, there is one that is more pressing than anything else, and that is jobs creation and improving the quality of jobs around the world. And let me a bit unfold what that means, and many of you that were at the spring meetings a week ago might have gotten a flavor of that. 1.2 billion people will be entering the workforce in the next decade, and only 400 million of those people are going to be finding a job. That clearly is a striking number that will leave big parts of the population really out of development. So what can we do to really solve that problem? And I think one of the things that we have learned over the years is that the long-term pathway for job creation that institutions like the World Bank, but also the ADB and many partners have followed, is actually still a valid one. You want to make sure that kids have good nutrition, that they go to school, they receive the skills that the market needs, and then the private sector lives in societies that grow and create jobs. Now, that pathway is a very long-term pathway that takes decades to really show the outcomes that we want to show. And we say now, many of those kids that are entering the job market in the next decade, they are already born, they are already misfed, they already receive skills that are not the skills that the market needs, and they grow in societies that do not have dynamic private sectors. So what can institutions like ours, like the World Bank, but also development partners, do to tackle that emergency? I think a couple of points. To answer that question, President Banga created what we call the High-Level Council on Jobs, that is co-chaired actually by somebody from your region, President Tharman of Singapore, and former President of Chile, Michelle Bachelet, that advises the bank how to think differently about this topic. And then they have told us that we need to concentrate on three things, which is creating the right foundations for job creation, and this is focusing a lot on infrastructure and human capital. Secondly, making sure that we create the right environment for jobs to be created, and this talks a lot about reforms at the country level. And finally, a dynamic private sector. So what we are doing across all of this is making sure that our operations across the world combine in a manner that can deliver on these aspects. Final point, I like a phrase of President Banga that says, we need to be really impatient for outcomes. And one of the things that we are doing at the moment that connects us to the results framework that we have, which is called the World Bank Scorecard, is that we have set targets in several sectors that we believe are going to raise the ambition of the bank significantly in those sectors, but at the same time are going to accelerate the jobs agenda. A clear example for us is, for example, providing 1.2 billion people, 5 billion people with access to health services by 2030. And in doing that, we are going to help solve the huge crisis of lack of health personnel that exists in the world, creating jobs while we deliver on those targets. So I really think that this is an agenda that we will have to be tackling collectively, and part of the conversation that we are having, including with the Asian Development Bank, is how do we combine forces to deliver the outcomes that we want to deliver, but at the same time also measuring those outcomes, because we do know if you don't measure, you don't manage, you don't achieve.
Thank you so much, Lisandro. I really appreciate how you said that what the High-Level Council is doing and the three areas that you're working on. It's the foundations for infrastructure and human capital. And you're right, education has always been the long-term solution, but now we find that poverty is multidimensional, so you need nutrition to be able to be educated. You have to be able to retain the knowledge to become a productive part of society. And I also appreciate the emphasis on the role of the dynamic public sector that is needed, which is also another priority areas in the ADB's midterm strategy review of 2030. So thank you so much. Now let me turn to Lena. So Lena, the Nordic Development Fund has placed a strong focus on the nexus between climate and development, which I think is very critical and vital right now. How can development partners lead the way in addressing these interconnected challenges? And can you provide examples of work that has been done in this direction? Thank you.
Thank you so much. And let me join Lisandro in thanking the bank for inviting us for this very interesting panel. It is, for me, it's a particular pleasure because we've been working, the NDF and myself, I've been working with the bank on different projects of almost 20 years' time. So it was actually first in 1990 when the NDF had the first loan-based project with the bank. And since that, we've had more than 20 loan-financed co-financing projects and more than 25 different grants since the introduction of the climate change and development mandate of the fund. And as organizations, honestly, it's very difficult to find differences between our organizations because we are so well aligned. We are really well aligned on the development effectiveness, the focus, the importance of results. So there's not much on that we can sort of find any differentiators on. But I would like to share with you some sort of observations and reflections that we see from this quite a long journey that we've had with the bank. And I will focus on the past 15 years when we have worked on the climate change and development mandate. Because when we as an organization embarked on that mandate, one of the first questions that we asked ourselves was that, okay, so what is a climate project? Nobody knew. We didn't know how climate and development would be interconnected in different activities. So it was, instead of sitting down and developing different policies for that, we started by action. And we found a very good partner in ADB in doing that. So NDF is really, we provide concessional financing. We can provide different instruments, loans, grants, equity, or any combination of those. But the key thing is that it's all concessional. So we have a great responsibility in placing this scarce capital at the right spots so that it makes sort of most bang for the buck, so to say. Of course, in grant projects, in early stages of climate finance, this was perhaps easier than how it is today. But nevertheless, anyway, so this question about asking what is a climate project, that was relevant at that stage. But then the climate agenda got more and more mainstreamed into different activities. So we asked ourselves that is it any longer relevant at all to sort of try to disentangle what in different investments is addressing climate change. And we would like to say that no, it should no longer be relevant to ask that question. But through our practical work, we still see that mainstreaming is not quite as effective as it could be. So I think we as development partners can work together with the bank to really make sure that the quality of different interventions from the climate perspective is really there. And this is, of course, now that everybody is talking about the need to involve the private sector in the development and climate work. So these questions come to a play in a kind of a refreshed way. The private sector and the public sector work a little bit in the different ways. So we must make sure that climate change is also the driver and that private sector solutions are addressing the climate sort of challenges, and that private sector can provide the innovation. for us, or in form of climate solutions. Then, I mean, this is a complicated agenda. We all know that. There are, I mean, no one solution, and one size doesn't fit all. But what we really see clearly is that we must have quicker learning loops. We have excellent practices for evaluation, for monitoring, for midterm reviews, but typically projects last for many, many years. And if you're in the evolving landscape of climate finance and the evolving climate change impact, if you wait for 8 to 10 years before you check what worked and what didn't, we are too late. It's just simply, the pace is so much more rapid than it used to be before we had to integrate the climate considerations. So I think, again, development partners and the bank can work on this, especially when we work with innovative financing solutions, innovative climate finance. We can actively think of building these kind of learning loops much quicker into the activities. And yes, maybe I will stop here for now and happy to reflect more later. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lena. It's very interesting you say about learning loops. We also talk about this on Development Effectiveness Committee at ADB. How do you learn from the solutions and the projects that you have done and bring it back in? And as well, it's very interesting, how do you define climate? And what would be climate projects? I know that's also very a big question, difficult to define still. Now, Bobby, let me turn to you. With your extensive experience in various governmental roles at Indonesia, how do you assess the relevance and alignment of ADB's new strategic priorities with Indonesia's national development agenda? Thank you.
Thank you, and good morning, and thank you for having me here. And it's an honor for us, for Indonesia, to be joined in the very important discussion. So as we understand that ADB has just released Strategy 2030 Midterm Review, the MTR, and introduced very new strategic priorities to address some global challenges. Interestingly, at the same time, Indonesia also just rolled out what we call National Medium-Term Development Plan, or RPGMN, for the period of 2025-2029. So I believe that ADB has been doing some great consultation jobs with all member countries, including with us, so to make sure that all the updated priorities really align with the national development of member country. And what I've seen is they did a very great job. Even in Indonesia's situation, when we have a transition from the previous cabinet to the new cabinet, they did a lot of consultation with us as a country. So Indonesia National Development Plan lays out a comprehensive strategy for us, how we, Indonesia, going to transform our economy, social, and environment. So there are a few key areas in Indonesia national term that stand out: energy and food security, green economy, and then also low carbon development, human resources, digital transformation, and also infrastructure. So this area vital for us for our long-term goals, as well as to achieve what we call net zero emission by 2060 or earlier. So now if we have to look the ADB updated priorities with our RPGMN, the medium term, the alignment is there, it's pretty clear and quite strong. So let me take an example here. Indonesia focus on energy and food security. So ADB also focus on climate resilience and sustainable energy. It's really aligned with us to ensure tackling the food challenge in middle of the climate change impact. Also aligned with our additional renewable energy mix in our energy sector. Another area is if we look on the focus private sector development. So it's also aligned with our intention, national target, to transform Indonesia economy, especially as we work on what we call industrial downstreaming, as well as digitalization. So this target will enhance the private sector roles in our development, and also mobilizing private sector is a key component and also very aligned with ADB expertise in this regard. Another area is human capital development. So ADB is strongly support the education and health, is very in line with Indonesia's effort to improve human resources as part of our social transformation. So other sectors is on the digitalization and also innovation. It's really aligned with Indonesia's target to be a nation with the digital economy, improve our e-government, as well as to boost our digital literacy. Maybe lastly, about the sustainable development of of what we call infrastructure, sustainable infrastructure. So ADB, of course, they are really push for the sustainable infrastructure development. That's really aligned with our intention to improve connectivity as well as focusing on green and resilient infrastructure in our nation. I think I'll stop here.
So thank you so much, Bobby. So it's good to hear, especially coming from the borrowing country members of ADB, that they are aligned, the strategic priorities are aligned, and the relationship really is important. And you said the transition, so dynamic consistency across administrations is very, very critical as well. So that's why there should be good relationships and dialogues as well with the countries. Now, I wanted also to discuss, so the ADB right now at the board we're discussing, and management is working on a new approach to private sector development, because more and more we realize that there's limited fiscal space, and it's really the private sector that we need to help to step in. So that involves upstream institutional regulatory reforms, as well as, midstream and downstream. So that's where we're working on now. So just a time check, it's 11:45 and 43, and we're on to round 2. Okay, so for round 2, we're going to talk about operationalizing these particular priorities that we have just discussed now, and I'm going to go back to Scott. So Scott, as highlighted in Lou's presentation, the new corporate results framework for 25 to 30 aims to enhance ADB's effectiveness in delivering development outcomes. In practical terms, how would you think this should be operationalized and enhanced focus on outcomes? And how might these changes manifest in day-to-day operations and long-term strategies? Thanks, Scott.
Sure, and I'm going to be quicker this time. So let me just highlight a few areas of institutional reform that are supporting and aligned with the question you asked. So one is to recognize our ongoing and now even stepped up commitment around decentralization and why that's actually so important. It's particularly important to have the corporate results framework and an intensive focus on development effectiveness, because part of the bargain here is that we want more delegation under decentralization, but that comes with accountability. And it's essential that we have the performance measures in place, that we can see the results of that. But it really is, I mean, it's a key priority, and certainly of the new president, he has referred to it repeatedly, that we do want more decentralization. We want to be closer to our clients. We want to be more efficient, move faster. But so these agendas are really tightly linked. Number two, and close to my day-to-day efforts, given the portfolio of countries I have, is a differentiated approach around FCAS and SIDS. So particularly if we just focus on, again, the Pacific as a region, there's a multifaceted agenda around what we mean by differentiated approach. But in simple terms, we have to recognize that not all countries are the same and not all regions are the same. The Pacific represents a unique set of characteristics and challenges. And again, when it comes to measuring our results and holding ourselves accountable, you have to take a different approach that reflects the environment in which you're working. So we're spending a lot of time thinking about more tailored approaches to results in that region. Excuse me. Enhanced use of data and analytics. Again, this is coming to fruition in a lot of different ways, even in the month-to-month throughout any given calendar year as we move through a project pipeline. In some ways, we always need to know more than we do, and it might surprise you that we know as little as we do in some instances. So, it requires dedicated effort to make sure that the data is being brought forward in real time so that we can use it to track how we're doing even on a week-to-week basis as we think toward the end of a calendar year. And then finally, I would just note an important policy review around our use of technical assistance. This is one of those, frankly, hidden gems, I think, of ADB, that we have very significant TA resources that we can deploy without spending too much time going out to donors all the time fundraising. But we need to have discipline around that. So I think it's important to have a review and bring questions of effectiveness to how we deploy TA resources in a wide range of uses. So let me stop with that.
Thank you so much, Scott. And I also appreciate you mentioning the review of the technical assistance approach. We're doing a lot on the board right now, technical assistance, regional cooperation review, private sector development approach as well. Let me turn to you again, Lisandro. The World Bank Group also revised the corporate scorecard just recently, introducing a stronger focus on outcomes. Can you share insights from this experience, and how is the shift impacting the organization's ability to deliver these outcomes? Thank you.
Thank you, Justin. Again, this is an area also where we have worked over the years very closely to the ADB, and I can see that many of the principles that we share are actually reflected in the new framework that you have. For us, the scorecard has really been a game changer, and I think it's been a tool that has inspired many development partners and many people, including inside the bank, to think a little bit differently about development outcomes and impact. When we were trying to develop the scorecard, I think the biggest motivation for us was to become more accountable for outcomes and for impact, and how can we do that? And there were two things that we needed to fight against and really find solutions for. Number one is the feeling that the more you measure, the more indicators you have, the more accountable you are. And that is exactly the opposite. In conversations, I'm glad that you are here representing the board as well, because in conversations that we had along the way with many different development partners, that is not always understood. The more indicators you have, actually, the less accountable you are, because at the end of the year, when you report on them, you really exceeded your performance in 25%. You did very poorly in the other 25%. For the other 50%, mostly you don't have data, but the others are more or less in the middle. Therefore, the conclusions is always, well, we're doing okay. So what we did is move really away from a scorecard that had 150 indicators to 22 indicators. 22 outcome indicators that allow you to track our contribution to results. We weren't happy with 22, we wanted 15, but we needed to account for the fact that we had a world institution that works across most sectors, and therefore we needed to have compromises in the number. I think the second point that we needed to fight against is the belief that in order to be accountable, you need to track the money along the way and make sure that we have activities, that we have outputs, that we can measure and make sure that the money is being used according to the plans. In fact, when you focus on outcomes, a little bit of that trajectory requires flexibility and not too much attention. So we got away. We went a little bit more radical than what you have done here. We got away with any indicator that wasn't outcome indicators, and the only thing that we have is indicators that track our results. Where is this taking us? We've seen, it's been only maybe 6, 7, 8 months since we launched the scorecard. We're seeing a completely different conversation within the bank about operations and about results and about impact. In the past, we were very much concentrated on, we are going to do this project for Indonesia for this amount of money. What is it that we can do to achieve good results and spend on all this money? Now the conversations internally start with what is the outcome that we want to deliver, how much money do we need for that, and what are the activities that will support it. Almost every single one of our operations is now mapped to the scorecard. In fact, we calculated recently that 85% of the ongoing operations connect directly to one of the scorecard outcomes, and that has changed the game entirely. And I would say that conversation is also a conversation that is more inclusive in our case, because we are organized in 5 different institutions, the World Bank Group, and the scorecard is common for all of them. So now when we are in the table, we are asking the same questions collectively, increasingly, of course with significant room for improvement, but it's the same North Star for all of us, really. And then I'll make a second and final point in terms of the impact that I'm seeing on the scorecard. We have, as I said in my first intervention, we have set targets for several of the scorecard indicators. These are targets that we call transformational targets in the sense that we have analyzed the trajectory historically of what we were delivering on a certain area or result, and we have chosen to double that as a target. So we have a target on giving people access to social protection services by 2030, 500 million people, but our projection of how much we were going to deliver with business as usual by that time was actually 250, and we have doubled it. Our intention is that that is going to generate a completely different level of ambition and innovation in the organization so that we can deliver close to those targets. And what we do with the scorecard is that we bring conversations and data while the teams are implementing so that they have a very clear understanding of whether they are on the right trajectory or not, and what are the thoughts and the shortcomings that we are seeing that they need to really change to move forward. So I stop here. That gives you a sense of where we are. I think that if we were to restart the scorecard, and in a way we have possibilities to improve, I will do two things, and I'm going to be provocative in one. One is I would try to make sure that I fight a third misconception on outcomes. That is that in order to measure results, you need to really be very robust, complicated, and precise about your methodologies. I get the sense that in the environments that which we work, having a direction that is credible is sufficient, and perhaps what I would do is lighten up a bit of the methodologies that we have created. And the second one, I'm going to look at Lou here, because I would think that if I were sitting where you are, I would require MDBs to really have one single scorecard for all of them and measure a few indicators the same way so you get a better understanding of what the system delivers.
Wow, that's amazing. That actually would feed into the next question, the next round for future. How could MDBs work better if we have a single scorecard? That would be amazing. But it's interesting how you said the scorecard changed how operations work, but this required a change in mindset as well, I'm sure, across the organization, and that must have also been very challenging. And we know that more is not necessarily better from what you said. But at the same time, attribution really of impact to development outcomes is very difficult. So I appreciate the last provocative thing you said, that to loosen up, it doesn't have to be exactly robust, that estimated. So thank you so much, Lisandro. Now let's go on again to Lena. So the Nordic and the NDF partnership with ADB includes flagship programs such as ADB Ventures and the Community Resilience Partnership Program. Can you share some of the tangible results on the ground and opportunities and challenges of impact monitoring, particularly in private sector projects? Thank you.
Thank you so much. The co-financing that NDF provides through the ADB, I like to call it creative capital. It's not financing that can compete in the size, but it can really compete in the quality class. And it can compete in the class of providing additional inputs to project design, project quality, and how the different investments target the climate change challenges. So we really want to emphasize this co-creation together with the bank, and I think the experience that we have, it provides a good opportunity to do this. So both these programs that you mentioned, the CRPP, which is focusing locally led adaptation solutions to be scaled up, as well as the ADB Ventures, they both represent these type of activities that actually originated from very early stage ideas, sort of, discussing different options, different ways of designing the programs between NDF and the bank, and different other development partners. So I think many of the results that we want to see, the creative results, they are designed at the planning board. So I really appreciate the willingness of the bank also to be receptive for different ideas that we have as an institution gathered from other regions. I mean, we have a lot of activities in Africa, also in Latin America, so we have learned from there as well. So I really think that these co-creation processes are extremely fruitful. And as the governor of Finland yesterday, representing also the other Nordic countries, highlighted, gender equality is something which is very near and dear to the activities of NDF. 100% of our portfolio is gender equal. We are quite proud of the results, and the gender equality policy that we have is very sort of, it's innovative, it's proactive, it's really progressive. So we are proud of that result. And we also want to make sure that all the co-financing that we provide takes into consideration gender equality aspects. There are numerous facts and results about gender equality leading to better development outcomes. And if you look at climate finance, many of the climate change impacts are much more harmful for women than other groups of society. So we want to promote that. And in the CRPP, we had a very good co-creation process around the gender equality with the bank, and that resulted in a specific gender window be included in the program. So that's a very good result, I think, from the planning perspective. That program is now taking off, so we will follow closely, of course, and again, these quick learning loops will have to be included so that we actually see how these, among other things, how the gender equality pays off in the activities. And the ADB Ventures is another type of activity. It resonates very well with the melody of today of integrating the private sector activities. It's also specific in the sense that it's housed at the ADB. It's kind of a hybrid form of an activity where you don't have an external professional fund manager in the same sense as in many other interventions tackling private sector development. So it's interesting because I feel strongly that MDBs, including the ADB, are well positioned to drive much of this work that facilitates the interaction between the public and the private sectors. So it has been very interesting to follow the ADB Ventures. I mentioned earlier that there are still challenges when it comes to impact monitoring of private sector activities. And of course, some of those aspects are present in the ADB Ventures as well. And we would have liked to see an even stronger gender equality aspect in that fund. But these are all lessons. I mean, sometimes you have to make some failures, or you have to have aspects that you can learn from. So I think it would be very beneficial for our institutions and all the other co-funders involved in ADB Ventures to do sort of a proper searching of aspects. How can we do better, and how can, this is again maybe going also to the next question, but how can institutions like the ADB can be sort of a broker between the public and the private sectors through these kind of interventions such as the ADB Ventures. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lena. Now, I appreciate what you said about the results in co-creation were designed at the planning stage. Really, the design of a project at the beginning is very critical, especially, and it shows in our annual portfolio performance reports. Better designed projects at the beginning really ensure better performance. Now, let me turn to you, Bobby, again. How do you think ADB and other development finance institutions can further work with countries in the region to address their development challenges? Specifically, what areas should be prioritized to maximize impact? And how can MDBs enhance their collaboration with national and local governments and communities to be more effective? Thank you.
Well, thank you, Justin. So let me start by saying that although most of the strategic development priorities across countries somehow are quite similar, but actually every country is different. So we all have our own unique challenges and priorities and local realities. So that's why I really believe that ADB and all development partners need to work hand in hand with all developing member countries based on what country actually needs. So using a country-driven approach is a best thing to do. And when the program is aligned with the national priority, the impact on the ground is much more meaningful directly to the communities and the country as well. And the development finance institution also sometimes do offer what we call one-size-fits-all policy. And it might be easier for development partners to apply the same template everywhere, but that's not how real development happens. So it takes a lot of work to create a customized support for each country. But this is the best to really make a difference. And in this sense, I really appreciate the ADB's move to what we call a more decentralized approach to what we call NOM, new operating model, since 2022. So this new operating model shows that ADB is serious about being closer to the member countries. And then, of course, as we move forward, we have to taking into account the implementation of this norm, and then localized approach will make ADB collaboration with the national government and especially with communities even more effective. So now when talking about the biggest maximum impact, what can ADB do? I would say it's a policy reform. So, of course, project loans is very important, no doubt, but when you help a country set up a new policies, a regulation, better system, you changing the whole landscape of that country, of that region. So that's why I think a kind of policy-based lending is a really powerful tool. So it touches not just one city or one project site, it touches every citizen, every life in the country, across the country. And finally, if I have to take option from all the priorities, so it should be the climate action, climate agenda, and sustainable development. Because at the moment, we know the climate target is kind of lag behind, and the huge financing needed there, still a lot of gap. And starting this year, we acknowledge that ADB start aligning 100% with the Paris Agreement. And that's a really big deal for ADB. So we do hope that ADB leadership in the climate change and sustainable agenda is consistent, and we will support, and we are grateful for that action. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Bobby. And I truly appreciate what you said with regards to policy reforms. I think that is very, very impactful, even in the case of the Philippines. So I'm not speaking as a board member, I'm speaking from the Philippines. We have a lot of policy-based loans which have helped develop our public financial management, our private sector when it comes to foreign investments. Now, let me turn to Lucien. You've explained how the CRF strengthens alignment with the Sustainable Development Goals. How will this stronger alignment translate into greater impact on the SDGs and accelerate progress towards these goals, which we know are still far from being reached in 2030? Thank you.
So thanks for that question. I think it's very important to first and foremost realize that the SDG is a framing tool, right? This is what really brings us together with a lot of our member countries, where we share this common framework, right? So we have a common language with which to really think about what it is that we're trying to achieve. Now, part of the job under the corporate results framework is really have less indicators, right? So that when you're looking for somebody within ADB, you know, the project officer who's preparing the project, to have them think differently. Kind of like what Lisandro's saying about this kind of mentality change of, are we thinking about outcomes, or are we thinking about very kind of microscopic type of project level outputs? So I think the new framing with 12 indicators, not to compete with Lisandro, on your 22, but this is a better way to get people focused on what is the objective that you're trying to achieve, right? And think more high level about what we're trying to deliver. And very importantly, and we were discussing this before the session, the alignment with national priorities cannot be understated, right? To make sure that you have alignment with what the countries need. Because this is not so much about SDG or achieving SDGs, but really what achieving under the SDG framework, what the countries need. Right? And so the intent of the corporate results framework is really to set that stage, right? And to set the corporate level vision that you can then easily cascade down to the project level. And I think that was really what was missing from the previous corporate results framework, when you had 99 indicators that people wanted to just kind of pull their hair out a little bit, right? To say, what is it that we're trying to align to? So with 12, it's much clearer, and then you get this easier message, right? That you can both kind of have the conversation with your counterparts, but also to cascade down and create that mentality change within the institution. Thanks.
Thank you so much. So we have about 4 more minutes for this panel before we open up to questions. We just have questions for just 2 more people here. Okay, so we're now focusing round 3 on MDBs working as a system, though you already had some suggestions earlier, Lisandro. What are your views, in addition to that, on the effectiveness of MDBs working as a system? How does this collaborative approach enhance the credibility and accountability of MDBs to tackle complex global challenges? And what specific benefits or improvements have you observed from this coordinated effort?
Thank you. You said 40 minutes to answer that question? 4.
No, 2.
Okay. Great. Thank you so much. Since we are here also really recognizing that I think the ADB has always been one of the best players in the game, pushing harmonization forward, and I know they work very closely with the World Bank Group in the region in many, many areas. The thing that I probably would say is that, and maybe I'll put this on a week ago, together with the director of strategy of the World Bank Group, we put out a blog that is called "Do Not Just Score, Change the Game." And the game was about, let's move away from an individual sport to a team sport, and let's adopt a mentality in which all the MDBs work together towards the ambitious results. I think from an outcomes perspective, really, if we adopt an outcomes perspective to harmonization, we shouldn't be doing anything on our own. I cannot think of a single development outcome that could be achieved in a partnership between the ADB and Indonesia alone, or the bank and Indonesia alone. I really think that the scale of the challenges need all of us. But when we are not doing that, either we are not doing the right thing, that might be a challenge that is not really very relevant, or it might be that we are not going to be effective. So really taking this seriously, I think, is something that we need to advocate for. Now, what do we see at some of the, a lot is changing at the moment in this cooperation. I think that we are probably closer than ever before. With ADB, we have mutual reliance agreements to implement operations. You've been involved in that, I've been involved in that. We have harmonized a lot the way in which we do measurement, many common indicators, many common methodologies. I think we're working, co-financing more projects than ever before. So I think we are all going in the same direction. What we need, perhaps, is to advocate for speed and scale and being patient about where that is taking us. What we have learned, we talked a little bit about culture, and I think that's a fascinating topic. When you clearly have to work hand in hand with somebody that you don't know very well, but has your same level of responsibilities, it forces you to really rethink what you are doing and rethink your own approaches. And I think ultimately that is the biggest test for all of us. If we were to be hand in hand closely and understanding each other, a lot of the innovative development solutions will come from that interaction. What else can I say? Nothing else, because I have no more time on this, but I think it gives you a sense of where my thinking is on the matter.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. Actually, building relationships and culture is really very important, not just among MDBs, but even, as Bobby mentioned earlier, within countries and the MDBs and the development financial institutions. So my last question would be for Bobby. From Indonesia's perspective, what challenges do you see in aligning the collective efforts of development finance institutions at the country level? And how can national governments help bridge these gaps to enhance coordination and effectiveness?
Well, thank you. So echoing what Lisandro says, that one of the main challenges in our perspective is that, well, to be honest, sometimes the development finance institution often come with its own mandate or its own procedures, priorities, and also timelines. So this is the one that we have to fully align across the DFIs. That's one thing. So other sector would be, other important area would be between DFIs and also the government. Sometimes the reporting or the format of the reporting is also different. So this is also create an extra lot of work for everyone involved. So it just for the reporting purposes, it's kind of different, each of the DFIs as well. So that's why it is very important for everyone to work together, streamline the process, and then also it create a win-win solution for everyone. And one more thing, the mutual reliance also a great works between ADB and also the World Bank. From our side, when we talk about the national coordination, there are a few ways that we can bridge this gap within our national coordination. Of course, we have a platform for coordination and also dialogue that's between Indonesia and also the DFIs, as well as between line ministries. So we do have what we call the Ministry of National Development Planning. This is a central role in our ministry. So this Ministry of Central Planning create a central role in the planning and also the execution and talking and discuss with each of the line ministry. So this is very needed for each country to have a coordinator between DFIs and also each of the national as well as with the subnational sometimes. I think I'll stop here. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Bobby. Now we shall open up the floor to questions in the room. Yes, sir, over here on the left. Oh, two, okay. We'll take a couple at a time, I guess, and then okay, we'll take three at a time. Manny's at the back, thank you.
So, thank you very much. My name is Aisha. I'm Secretary Climate Change in Pakistan. It's really good to know the strategy and the framework for looking at the indicators and results. I tend to agree with what Lena said, that we need to do a lot for mainstreaming. Climate action still remains a separate component. So we need a lot of effort to connect climate in the 3 Ps of people, planet, and prosperity. So how is ADB and World Bank planning to do that? Because we need a lot of green skills, we need a lot of shift towards green economy. When we talk about people, planet, and prosperity, countries have to shift their growth models towards green, and that requires a lot of regulations. So how do we create an incentive system within countries which motivates the private sector and the people to change their behavior? Because regulation in itself in a developing country could lead to rent seeking as well. So we have to create a fine balance, and instead of over-regulation, we have to create incentive systems. So how the 2 banks will help the countries to create that while empowering people, planet, and prosperity.
Okay, thank you. Someone else, please? No, we're taking 2 questions, 2 or 3 at a time, please. Thank you. Okay. To be efficient.
Hi everyone, I'm Marete Luft from Urgewald, CSO based in Germany. And I think it's very great to hear that, well, that ADB is aligned with Paris alignment 100%, and also what you've been saying, that one of the main goals is achieving climate change. However, I feel like aligning with Paris alignment and actually going further in climate change and the discourse around actually aligning with countries' objective has a little conundrum in itself, because we've heard yesterday in a meeting that the energy policy review or the energy policy is supposed to be it's supposed to be Paris aligned but not 1.5 degree aligned. And shouldn't the ADB not actually go one step further and not only be Paris aligned, but actually 1.5 degrees aligned, which means like a project can be Paris aligned if it's aligned with the national objectives, but that doesn't mean it necessarily has to be 1.5 degrees aligned. Like gas can be aligned with the national objectives. I mean, coal is excluded, but could also be aligned with national objectives. So shouldn't the ADB actually go one step further and have their goal to be 1.5 degrees aligned?
Okay, thank you. So it's more of what more, or should it go beyond? Thank you. Manny, please, and then this gentleman, and then we'll have the panelists answer that, please. Thank you.
Thank you. Terrific conversation. Really appreciate it. I'm Manny Jimenez from Asian Development Bank's Evaluation Department. I was really intrigued by the conversation about how changes in mindset, because I really think that corporate results frameworks, powerful incentive mechanism. I was just wondering, maybe Lysandra and maybe if Scott and Luke could reflect also, whether you've seen any indications yet that the focus on outcomes and results is leading less towards a volume-driven incentive mechanism for managers, towards more a results-based driven. And if not, when do you expect that to happen?
Thank you, Manny. And one more, please. This one. For the next round, perhaps. Thank you. Yep, you can go, sir.
Thank you. Good morning, and thank you for the beautiful panel this morning. My name is Umberto Marengo from British International Investment, the UK DFI. A question for the whole panel on outcome assessment and outcome effectiveness. So outcome measurement has been around for a few decades. We had deliverologies and decades so far. So I was really wondering, what are your lessons learned in terms of doing effective outcome measurements, recognizing complexity, empowering the frontline service delivery, empowering learning in a way which empowers the bottom up rather than just the top down, to avoid effectively the gaming of the results. There's kind of a philosophical question which has been around in impact management for a while, but I think it's quite an interesting one to develop. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Umberto. So we have a very wide range of questions. First would be the incentivizing countries to motivate change in behavior with respect to climate. Should we be aiming for more with respect to climate? Changes in mindset, indications, and focus more on outcomes rather than volume-driven lending, as well as not gaming the measurement of outcomes. So who would like to begin? And you can answer them all at the same time. I think that would be more efficient. Lissandra?
Thank you very much. These are great, excellent questions, and I'll try to say a few things. Manny and many of you were asking about this issue of the culture, and I actually confidently believe that, at least in the World Bank Group, we are seeing a shift. These things take a lot of time to materialize. They can be reversed, but very clearly we seem to be in a steady pathway towards focusing more on outcomes that we were at other points in time. We have done that not only by having a focus, a scorecard that is focused, but also by building in the system, and Lou talked a little bit about that, and Scott as well, hardwiring the conversation about the scorecard in the system. So every single project needs to be linked to the scorecard. We have new country strategies for which, when you create your own results framework, you need to decide to which scorecard indicators you are contributing to. We have linked the scorecard to the performance evaluation of many of the senior leaders of the organization. So that is the aspect of the scorecard that complements the inspirational aspect of it and allows you to have what I call the two logics of outcome measurement. The logic of, I will do it because it is the right thing to do, and I will do it because I am afraid that if I don't do it, something that I don't want will happen to me. And those two things, when you create cultures of outcomes, I think need to interact together. And this is where we are going with our work. On Umberto's point, on the sort of the effects that we don't want to see and the bottom up, I have many things to say, but I'm only going to say one. When we monitor the implementation of the targets of the scorecard, one of the things that has become my obsession is this phrase that I usually use that says, let's make sure that we do not hit the target without missing the point. Because a lot of the times when we have targets, and many of the systems that you mentioned, we obsess to hit the target, but we miss the point, which is development. And in many of the countries in which we work, you can get big numbers, but not necessarily good development. So what my department does, a bit in conjunction to the Office of Evaluation that Manny represents here, we make sure that we learn through the process and identify the things that are going in the right direction in terms of numbers, but not in the right direction in terms of the quality of what we do. So bridging those conversations, I think, is important. Final thing that I would say on the climate side, not my area, but clearly climate is good development. So this is something that is being mainstreamed over the years in many of the things that the World Bank Group does, if not everything. My department tracks what we call the climate co-benefits. So this is the amount of resources that are dedicated to climate across most of the sectors. And there isn't any single sector which has to not have an angle that is climate oriented. And the scorecard captures 5 indicators on that area that hopefully will give you a sense if you go to the website of what we contribute. The bank started a couple of years ago what we call the climate and development reports as well, that you might be familiar with, merging the two perspectives. Development and climate are part of the same journey, and finding solutions in that direction. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lissandra. Yes, Scott, please.
Sure. I mean, to Manny's your question, addressed in my opening comments, and I expressed it, frankly, more as a worry than a statement of confidence about where we are, because the fact is we've teed up a lot of financing ambition that creates strong incentives around volume. So it's something we have to be mindful of and address directly in a lot of different ways, including in senior management, that we're sending the right signals. And by the way, this pertains squarely to the climate agenda too, because and this goes well beyond ADB as an institution, but climate finance has become an agenda of its own that in some ways can feel disconnected from the outcomes we're trying to achieve. I mean, so we take finance, which is really just an input, we already treat it as an output, and it's certainly not that, let alone an outcome. So, you know, I do worry about that aspect of the climate agenda. To those climate questions more generally, I would say, you know, look, we have to recognize it is our developing countries who are in the driver's seat in their relationships with us, in the sense of defining the partnership. And that's not just a principle, it speaks squarely to our financing role. We are largely a lending institution, and yes, when it comes to critical agendas like climate, we want to find ways to introduce financial incentives. At the end of the day, it is still the case that most countries are borrowing from us for this set of activities. So we do have to listen to them in terms of how they're defining their priorities. So, you know, again, at a principles level, I think it has always and should always be the case that when it comes to multilateral development banks, we are addressing a climate agenda through a development lens. And, you know, that's a critical element of the dynamics. It does inform how we have to think about what our targets are, where are we taking our cues from, how are we setting ambition. Is that at the end of the day, these are developing country choices about how they want to spend the money they are borrowing from us. So it's challenging. You know, there aren't easy answers to it, but we do have to hold to those principles and who we are as an institution.
Thanks, Scott. Lou, please.
Just, I think a few points on the question about, you know, the trade-offs between inputs or, you know, incentives that are being created within the institution and the kind of drivers that are getting people to do things based on, you know, financing or based on results. This is something that I think a lot about. I certainly think that top-down kind of messaging is very, very important for the institution to make it clear that, you know, they don't have to be mutually exclusive, and many of the times they should be linked to each other. But I think on the working level, what I think a lot about is how to make the systems a lot easier so that project officers can have conversations with their counterparts. How can you create systems not only for yourselves, but for your countries where you can actually collect the information and collect the data? We're in an era where this is much more possible than in any other time. And so how do we leverage the tools that we have at the working level to come up with something that becomes a low barrier to entry, for example, for the project officers that don't see it as an additional burden, but something that will help them, right, with their project preparation or project implementation. So I think that top-down, but also the bottom-up type of, you know, communicating to your counterparts using the country offices to help you, you know, create, well, not create, but to deliver the message and cascade the message, but also on the system side, how do you make it easier for this to be done? I think those are the kind of things that will make a difference in the long run.
Thank you so much, Lou. Lena, did you have anything to add? Okay, Bobby.
Thank you. So I will make a general comment here. So as a country, one of our important target, of course, the economic growth, while maintaining the sustainable agenda in our development. So as a government, especially the Ministry of Finance, we do have some instrument like fiscal tools, as well as the risking policy, as well as the regulation and policy formulation and enforcement. So this is the area that we can work together with the DFIs, MDBs, either in policy formulation or fiscal alignment, incentivized system, or even the risking policy formulation. While also we have to sustain our economic growth and also decoupling with the climate agenda. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Bobby. We'll just have one more, and then we will end the session, please. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And first of all, thank you for this very interesting panel. My question is still climate related, but much more pragmatic than the previous ones. So I represent Maire, which is a major Italian corporate group, but also a global provider of sustainable technology and engineering services. And nowadays we are actually discussing a project in Indonesia that would be for the production of sustainable aviation fuel with an innovation technology. So we wanted to understand whether this, or projects like this, fits into the strategic priority of both the Indonesian government and ADB, and if so, how it's the best way to have ADB on board of this project or similar ones. Thank you so much.
Okay. Bobby, please. Thank you.
Well, thank you for the question. I will respond in a kind of a very short comment at the moment. So the sustainable aviation fuel is also fit with our agenda, the sustainable development agenda, especially if we're talking about the broad topic of energy security. And then one of the focus at the moment is like increasing our energy mix, mostly from the renewable. So it will fit, align with our national energy strategy. And then, of course, we are happy to discuss more about this project. Thank you.
Yeah, and just to say,
go ahead.
Look, sort of leading edge technology deployment within this agenda and more broadly is one of the most critical things we are always trying to do. I mean, my suggestion and absolutely sustainable aviation is a key agenda item. You want to engage with our energy sector experts, and then you want to better understand how to engage with us even at a contractual level. There's a whole set of procedures around procurement that are important to understand when countries do want to engage in this and they're borrowing from us. So very much encourage you to start the conversations with our energy team.
Okay, thank you very much. So, ladies and gentlemen, as we bring this session to a close, I would like to thank all of our excellent panelists here on the board. I'm hungry. We have a governor's lunch right now. But just a couple of things I wanted to highlight with respect to ADB's work. So, and bring it back actually to strategy, policies, corporate results framework, and development outcomes, which is what this is really all about, this panel here is about. So ADB remains committed to navigating the challenges faced by the region with adaptability and strong leadership. Our approach is guided by the core principles of development effectiveness. First is the ownership of development priorities by member states, as Bobby highlighted earlier, and I also highlight for the Philippines. You have to know the countries that you're engaging with and what they want and listen to them, ensuring that our developing member countries lead the way in setting their development agenda. Second, a strong focus on results, which is what we are trying to advocate right now, prioritizing tangible outcomes that improve lives and foster sustainable development. Third, partnerships with a diverse range of stakeholders, including governments, civil society, and private sector. And last, transparency and mutual accountability in our actions. So there are 4 C's that I would like to summarize for this one. First is change the game, which Lisandro said earlier, but to change the game, you have to have cultural change as well. And Lena mentioned that there should be co-creation, whether it be with DFIs and countries or across DFIs or across MDBs. There should be co-creation, and that requires a lot of dialogue, a lot of data and diagnostics. And whether it be climate or development nexus, we're all in this together. So thank you so much.